Hello and welcome to Stuart Saturday Live with me, your hostess, Andrea Zuvich, the 17th century lady. Thanks to everyone who watched last month's show with our guest historian, Mark Turnbull. Mark and I had a good old chat about Charles I, his private life, his execution, the civil wars, and much more. If you missed that show, you can hop on over to my podcast, The 17th Century Lady. Available on Spotify, Apple, and more. And you can hear the audio. Just look for Stuart Saturday Live with Mark Turnbull, and you'll have it. While you're there, you may be interested to listen to other episodes, which are meant as tasters of subjects about the 17th century. Today's live show will become available to listen to in podcast form as well. Well, it's February, and love is in the air, and Valentine's Day is just a few days away. Valentine's Day is named after St. Valentine, a Christian who was martyred in the 3rd century, who, according to legend, secretly married couples in the Christian faith. People living in Stuart Britain also celebrated Valentine's Day with sending valentines to one another, but it was very different. We're not exactly sure what sort of things they did, but it was mentioned in the literature of the period, and it certainly was not commercialized to the extent it was today. In his play from the early 17th century, Hamlet, Shakespeare had his Ophelia sing, "Tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day, all in the morning betime, and I am made at your window to be your Valentine." Then up he rose and donned his clothes, and dupped the chamber door, let in the maid that out a maid never departed more. Princess Elizabeth Stuart, daughter of Anna of Denmark and James VI of Scotland and First of England, married Frederick V of the Palatinate. And on the 14th of February, 1613, they were married. And in honor of their wedding, the great Stuart writer John Donne wrote Epithalamion, if I pronounce that correctly, upon Frederick Count Palatine and the Lady Elizabeth, married on St. Valentine's Day. Although this was a match that was made primarily for political reasons, the couple eventually fell in love. And love is the theme for today's Stuart Saturday Live show. For those of you who love historical fiction set in the Stuart period, you can't have failed to notice the brilliant work by author Elizabeth St. John, who is well known for her critically acclaimed series set in the 17th century, the Lydiard Chronicles. So please welcome Elizabeth, who is joining us live from San Diego, California, to chat with me all about the great Stuart era romances. Hello, Liz. Welcome to Stuart Saturday. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you, Andrea. It's absolutely lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
I think we first met during a Historic Novel Society conference back in 2016 in Oxford. I remember that. It really was so much fun, wasn't it?
I can't think of a better setting than Oxford for a historical novel conference. And I have to say, I think I spent half my time in Merton just marveling at the architecture and soaking up the atmosphere. And the other half of my time I spent with dress envy at your costume, because I remember thinking, who is that gorgeous woman who dares to walk around dressed like that? And you looked amazing. So, I plucked up the courage to come and say hi.
Thank you. Yeah, but we became friends after that. I remember that. And you were in this beautiful, sophisticated, elegant blue dress. It was so nice. And I remember, we were. I was quite heavily pregnant at the time with Juliet, and and I was trying to look like Marie Mancini. So she was from the 17th century. Anyway, very good times, lots of fun. What was we became more acquainted over the years because of our shared love of 17th century history. You've been researching and writing about the period for a number of years now, but you have a particular connection to one stately home in Wiltshire. Could you tell us more about your personal links to this beautiful place?
Absolutely. And I really fell into the 17th century by accident through Lydiard Park, which is our family ancestral seat. It's just outside of Swindon, and it's been in the family for 600 or 700 years now. It was
Wow.
originally a hunting lodge, and it became actually it was Margaret Beecham who gave it to the family back in the 1400s. And I used to go there as a little girl. It was a private house. It actually fell into dereliction just after the World War II. But it was saved and it's been restored. And I'm now very blessed to be a trustee of the Friends of Lydiard, because the history there is extraordinary, Andrea. I mean, I think the beauty is that it came into its own in the early 17th century, and it is now stuffed full of extraordinary 17th century paintings. The layout of the house, you can see how it was remodeled. And the church, which is adjoining, is stuffed full of wonderful monuments. This is actually an artist's impression of Lydiard in the early 17th century, before Capability Brown style came in. And you can see it had beautiful reflecting pond. It had a bowling alley, wonderful gardens. We have recipe books dating back to that time. So it just caught my imagination. And then it's family. It's I walk in there every time I go back. I always have to sort of apologize to some of the portraits for how I've written about them, and say hi to some of the others.
Oh, that's so wonderful to have that amazing connection over so many hundreds of years, and to find yourself in the same place where your ancestors walked and lived, and that must be an extraordinary feeling.
It is, and I go back, different times of the year. I was just back just before Christmas, and the park land was foggy and it was very atmospheric, and I was staying actually in the old house. And to look out of a window and know that my 17th century ancestor looked out at that view, that window, that moment, as we say, the veil becomes thin and you get really inspired to write.
Oh, I'll bet. And I think there are some nice parterres there. It's a shame that presumably that's all gone now. Is it? I haven't been able to go yet.
Yes, well, we do have a beautiful walled garden that remains, that was partly done in the 17th century.
Oh,
but interesting. Yeah, you have to go. But interestingly enough, and I won't take up too much time. As you can tell, I can talk about Lydiard forever.
That's fine. I love it.
We did. When was it? 2 years ago, we had the really big drought, and we had an extraordinary experience where we had parch marks of the 17th century landscape appear in the grounds, and we sent up a drone right away, and we could actually then map the 17th century gardens as you saw them in Billy's portrait. So that's an architectural program that we're hoping to do in the next few years, is to restore those 17th century gardens. I'm pushing for that.
Oh, I'd love that. That would be wonderful. I think that sort of makes these houses come to life all the more when they have the historically correct gardens that were built around the time. Yeah. Wow. That's really great. Keep me posted on that, please.
Yes, well. And just to then let you know, this is the 17th century family that was living there at the time. And there's some extraordinary love stories around these people. So I'm going to be sharing a few of those. But this is a life-size polyptych within St. Mary's Church that was commissioned by the first baronet in 1615. He was very proud of his heritage. It's an extraordinary monument. And he gave, again, me such great inspiration. His 6 sisters, his parents, and then he's on the left there with his wife. So tracking down all their stories was extraordinary.
And that's such a beautiful and striking image there.
Yes.
Wow. I think you have a bit more to talk about. You wrote a trilogy,
Yes.
the Lydiard Chronicles. Could you tell us what time period and which historical characters
I'd love to.
you were inspired by and wrote about, please.
Yeah. So, of course, it never started out to be a trilogy. I was my first person that I wanted to talk about and write about was the youngest of those sisters, and she was born just at the end of Elizabeth's reign, and eventually married a gentleman and moved into the Tower of London. And she was the keeper's wife in the Tower for 13 years, all the way through some of the most extraordinary Stuart episodes that were going on in the Tower. She was there when Howard was in there. She was there when the, what was his name? The Earl of Northumberland was in there. So she'd witnessed all these extraordinary events. And she was also related to the Villiers family. So she had this extraordinary, yes, that's how that went. Her brother-in-law was George Villiers' brother. So again, it was, as I started to do sort of the research, it became very apparent that there was more than one story there. So I ended up writing a trilogy following the family through successive 2 generations into the Civil War and then into the Restoration, because I just couldn't stop. It was just extraordinary family history, extraordinary world history that they were eyewitnesses to. And then these beautiful love stories that were woven in between of loyalties and families in conflict and so on. So
that's brilliant. Let's see. I'd like to chat to you about some of these great love stories of the Stuart period. And of course, there were quite a few, including Charles I and Henrietta Maria. Oh,
right.
Lots of people know about that one. These two started off on the wrong foot, really. There were many tensions and misunderstandings between them in the beginning. Things improved when Charles's favorite, George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham, was assassinated. And we hear that name quite a lot in the Stuart period, don't we? The surname of Villiers. They had a very loving marriage, very faithful, and that's quite surprising for the royals, I suppose. And of course, it ended with his execution in 1649. Elizabeth, I was wondering if you'd be so kind as to tell us about some of the love stories you've come across that may be lesser known.
Yes, I'd love to. And I think theirs was an extraordinary story because of the Villiers, part of that, but we'll leave the Villiers for another whole broadcast.
Yes.
The story into itself. I think you look for love stories as a writer and as a researcher in different places, right? I mean, it's not always recorded. I was very fortunate, and I'll talk about that in a moment, to have contemporary memoirs from the 1600s to draw on for our family stories. But you can often find them in wills or letters or trace evidence of these extraordinary stories. And the first one that I stumbled across was the Lady of the Tower, the youngest daughter, the youngest sister in those 6 St. John pictures. I don't know if we can look at a picture of them, but it's the 6 sisters. They all have wonderful love stories. But Lucy, who was the Lady of the Tower, had her heart broken at an early age. That's a different one. Sorry, that's actually we're kind of going out of order.
Oh, sorry.
You'll see a picture of all of the sisters together from that polyptych. We can go back to that.
Right.
But she had her heart broken at court, and she left court to go and stay with her sister. And she was there contemplating, frankly, taking up a life of complete isolation. And while she was there, her sister's husband's friend came along to see him, came back from Ireland. And here's a moment here that he talks about in the memoirs, saying that when he was going, that's it, thank you, that's Lucy on the very far left there. Okay. And her daughter writes that when he was staying at her house. He was supposed to be married to someone else. And he was, in fact, procured a match of a very rich widow who was a lady of as much discretion as wealth. But while he was upon his design, he chanced to see my mother, who was staying with her sister. And though he went on his journey, yet something in her personal behavior he carried along with him, which would not let him accomplish his arranged marriage, but brought him back to my mother. He fell so heartily in love with her that he persuaded her to marry him, which she did, and her melancholy made her conform cheerfully to that gravity of habit and conversation, which becoming the wife of such a person was appropriate for. And there's just this sort of, he was much older, she was younger, but they had this wonderful romance, and he then moved into the Tower of London and things kind of went sideways from there. But
oh dear.
The footnote to that, Andrea, which again, if we look for these sort of signs of romance, when he was dying, he wrote his last will and his testament. He was very much a Calvin. And he wrote in his testament a great apology for the pain that he had caused her through his indebtedness through his life. And he ensured that her reputation was intact, that the creditors wouldn't go after her. So this very poignant love story plays out in very practical memoirs, which I just loved. And that to me was the essence of my book.
Oh, that's really lovely. Thank you for sharing that with us. And here we have two other individuals.
Yes.
Could you talk to us about them, please?
I would love that. So this is the one that we don't really think about, which is two Puritans and their love story. And these are two absolutely exquisite miniatures. They're part of our Lydiard archives, our digital collection. They're in a private collection, and the owner of which very kindly gave us permission to use within the archives. On the left is
stunning.
Stunning.
They're just stunning.
They really are. On the left is Lucy Hutchinson, the author of the sort of very, very notable memoirs of the Civil War. And on the right is her husband, John Hutchinson. Theirs was an extraordinary love affair. She was a brilliant writer. She was an extraordinary eyewitness to the Civil War. And her memoirs reflect not only her passion for the Commonwealth, for the parliamentarian cause, but also the beauty of nature and love and this background of sort of aristocratic upbringing that she'd had, because her mother was Lucy St. John, the Lady of the Tower. So this love affair started with John, Colonel Hutchinson. He was boarded at Richmond Palace. He was there to play his music, and he met Lucy's sister, and they were all there as musicians, and there was an extraordinary sort of vivacious crowd pre, of course, the Civil War. This was in around the 1630s. And he started talking to her sister, and then her sister invited him back to their house. And while he was there, he saw this extraordinary library of Latin books. And he said, "Whose books are these?" And she said, "My sister." And he looked at the books, and he started falling in love with the woman who would possibly be reading this kind of thing, which don't we all want?
I love that.
So anyway, she was off again, being conducted in an arranged marriage. She was back down at Lydiard. And he was very sad at that thought. And he continued to stumble across these references to her, a song that she'd composed, a piece of writing that she'd written. And he fell deeper and deeper in love with this woman that he'd never met. And eventually they came back from Wiltshire. She had refused, for whatever reason, to enter into the arranged marriage. And he met her for the first time. And there's a lovely eyewitness account of him seeing her for the first time. She writes in her memoirs of herself in the third person. She was not ugly in a careless riding habit, but she had a melancholy negligence both of herself and others, as if she neither affected to please others nor to have them notice of anything about her. Yet, in spite of all her indifferency, she was surprised with some unusual liking in her soul when she saw this gentleman who had hair, eyes, shape, and countenance enough to beget love in anyone. And so, love at first sight is really what they had there for this moment. So they continued to meet. Again, the background was this ever-increasing tension of what was going on in the political environment. They were at the palace. They were in Richmond. They were devout people, but they weren't being called to make a choice at this point. They were just falling in love with each other. And eventually, he persuaded her family to allow him to marry her. He came from a good family. On the day that the friends met to conclude the marriage, she fell very sick of the smallpox. And her life was a desperate hazard, as he writes. And here's another little example here. It says, the disease for the present made her the most deformed person that could be seen. And for a great while after she recovered, but he was not troubled at it. But he married her as soon as she was able to quit her sick chamber. So she was dreadfully deformed. He still married her. Everyone at the wedding was affrighted to look upon her. And yet he was still there for her. So they married and honestly had this extraordinary relationship for the rest of their lives. That again was, we don't think of Puritans having this sort of passionate love declarations, but they did.
No. Yeah, but that's the thing. We tend to see things in stereotypes, and it's not the way things were. People were people, and they had loves and passions and everything. It doesn't matter what political side they were on.
That's right.
But that, to me, that is just what I would regard as true love.
Mm-hmm.
That wonderful acceptance of someone, no matter what.
No matter what. Yeah. And she wrote, her memoirs are heavy going at times because she's very quite complex, but it's a fascinating history. And she wrote, he died before she did. She wrote that when he died, it was as if a mirror had gone out of her life because she could not even see herself because she was no longer reflected in his eyes, which is just so poignant.
That's very moving. Wow, thank you. Yes, that reminds me of some of the other stories, love stories from the time. The civil wars had quite a lot to do with everyone, and it impacted so much. I think one that I'd like to mention is the love between Dorothy Osborne and William Temple. And so that's image 7. Yes, thank you. This couple met during the Civil War, and they fell in love with each other very deeply. Theirs was a very difficult relationship, however, because their parents were totally opposed to their relationship. So they were forced to keep it a secret. In time, however, they were able to get married. And one of the most wonderful things about their relationship was the fact that they wrote many love letters to each other. And I find their letters quite extraordinary. I have this quite old copy of the love letters, well, just the letters of Dorothy Osborne and their to William Temple. And it's the Folio Society copy from 1968. And it's just extraordinary. It's similar to what we've seen before. And the love, the fighting over and the waiting, the patience to finally have that life with the person that one loves is quite moving, and you can understand it from any time in history. Yeah.
I think you're right. And I think, it's very hard for us to perhaps grasp the essence of time in those days. and the sense of the unknown. I mean, through the war, through that time, you wouldn't get letters regularly. You couldn't pick up the phone. You couldn't text someone. You just had to trust that they were in God's hands. They were keeping them safe. You were writing letters, not even knowing if they were alive. So to keep love alive through all of that hardship, incredibly poignant when you read back.
Yes.
And I think as a researcher, Andrea, don't you find it really hard when you know what happens, but you're reading letters that are contemporary to the time, and they obviously have no idea what lies ahead. That's
yes. It can be quite gut-wrenching sometimes when you come across that. You know something bad is going to happen, and yet there's this. We have this where we can see what they were thinking about at one time, and they had no idea what was going to be before them eventually. Right. Yes. Let's see. Is there a next one perhaps about the Wilmots?
No, Wilmots. So this one is a really interesting one. On the left, we have Henry Wilmot. I call him the rake of all rakes, right? I mean, this is John's father. Before we all get excited, I'm going to start talking, John Wilmot and Johnny Depp and all that. That's another whole series. So this was Henry Wilmot, who's was an extraordinary soldier, and but he was such a man's man. He was the king's right-hand guy. He was one of the bad boys around Charles, but he was also an extraordinarily brave man. I mean, I think he was probably the first sort of swashbuckler. I mean, he would sort of ride into battle without care of his own safety. He was the guy who stood by Charles's side after Worcester, helped get him out of the country, dressed him up in these dreadful disguises. I constantly had this sort of great swashbuckling air about him. And so he was a really interesting man. Just before Edge Hill, he was looking to get some supplies and to get some weapons and so on. And he had a mutual friend with Anne St. John and Anne St. John Lee on the right there, who was Clarendon, at Lord Hyde. And Hyde said, look, we've got Ditchley Park over here, which isn't that far away. And I know the lady there. She'll help us get weapons, and she's already been kind of working on the side of the royalists. So if we need a place to hang out or hide out later, she's good for that. So somewhere their paths crossed, and I don't know exactly what it is, but you have this sort of hard-boiled fighting soldier and this rather straight-laced, it's a very intimidating portrait of Anne.
Yes.
She wasn't
quite formidable.
Extremely formidable. And if you read her letters later, not love letters, but her estate letters, and I mean, she was an extraordinary woman, very, very straight talking, hard-headed businesswoman, ran her estates. But somewhere along the line, they met. And somewhere along the line, they fell in love because it had to be a love match. There was nothing that was a reason from a business standpoint for her to fall in love with Henry. And he had more than his hands full with the king and the court and everything else. So they definitely fell in love. The product of which, of course, was John Wilmot, second Earl.
Yes, so it seems
his
like
mother's heartbreak.
Well, I can see why. I mean, she was so very different from him.
Absolutely. And but we know that. And there was a really interesting when I wrote Written in Their Stars, which really actually tells the interregnum and the restoration from Lucy Hutchinson and from Anne Wilmot's point of view. We know that Henry would keep coming back into the country in these dreadful disguises, and he was rallying troops, rallying support, trying to get uprisings going. but he always managed to come and see Anne at Ditchley Park. And he always managed, to sort of escape Cromwell's men and, fight his way out of tavern brawls and show up on Anne's doorstep.
Wow.
And so we know that there was a wonderful attraction there. And when he did eventually die, which was in tragic circumstances, way away from home, it took her almost a year to get his remains back to England, and she buried him in the church that's right by Ditchley Park, and never married again, and obviously mourned him deeply. So again, that's sort of one of, as we were talking about, Civil War does strange things to people, and
it does, yeah.
If you look at the correlation even to sort of World War II war brides, two people met under intensely difficult circumstances, and whether they thought they had no time in the future or whether it was this instant attraction, but it was there and they married, and when they were together, I think they were intensely happy.
Oh, that's so good to know. And it's sad when we hear about people having terrible ends, but at least he did have the joy of having a love like that. So
Yes.
it must have brought him great solace in the times of great trouble for him.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, wow. I find that quite moving. Yes. So we spoke a little bit about their son, John, who was a wonderful wit and amazing poet. His father wasn't known to swear much. He may have been a great rave,
Yes.
but he wasn't one to swear. His son was very different because he certainly swore a lot, didn't he?
Yes, I think John more than made up for Henry's reticence in cursing.
Yes. Speaking of libertines from the Restoration, the Duke of Monmouth had a series of ladies, but he, towards the end of his life, he formed an attachment to Lady Henrietta Wentworth. And I find theirs is quite a tragic love story as well. So these fell in love in the 1680s, and their tale for me inspired me to write my book about them back in my 20s. Thing is, Monmouth was married to Anna Scott, who was a very wealthy heiress when they were both in their early teens. I mean, very, very young, 13, around there. And that was certainly not a love match. It was just political, and she had a lot of money, as I said. But as he became older and grew into the position of Restoration rake, Monmouth had to share flings, but Henrietta seems to have been the love of his life. There are some interpretations from some historians that make it look as though she was a very calculating sort of person or what have you. But putting that to one side, Monmouth himself seems to have been genuinely in love with her. And I think that's what counts here. On the scaffold on Tower Hill, shortly before his execution, now he was executed, for those who don't know, because he led the Monmouth Rebellion of 1685 following the death of his father, Charles II, and the ascension to the throne by his uncle, James II. And he wanted to take over as king, as a Protestant king, and he had he tried to gather enough support to pull off a sort of coup, but it wasn't successful. So anyway, he was sent to the Tower of London, and he was executed in 1685 in the summer. And but when he was on the scaffold, he refused to say that his relationship with Henrietta was sinful. He loved her to the very end, and he didn't want her to have her name be flung through the mud He didn't want that. He wanted her to be respected, and he wanted everyone to know that his love was a genuine love. And to me, I thought that was quite moving. Hopefully, I'll be able to enlarge that story someday, because his life, Monmouth's life, was so full of amazing, important historical events.
I think that's fascinating, Andrea, and what a sad story, but this really important sort of last gesture of clearing her name, clearing association with him. It's, you know, on a very small scale, it's the same thing that Sir Alan did with his wife. You know, it was really important, I think, for these men to realize that they were leaving these women in very difficult straits, and society was not, you know, compromising. I mean, I don't know her story. I mean, what happened to her after he died?
Well, Henrietta died the following year, and some people said it was because she used too much makeup, and so she poisoned herself with makeup. But it was I think it was a nasty thing. I don't think there's any truth to it. I mean, of course, makeup did have toxins in it at that time, but I think that was mainly to cast her off in a bad light, because she had originally had a very good reputation, but she was supposed to marry an earl, and she met Monmouth, and she was no longer, she cut off the relationship with the earl and became involved with Monmouth, and it certainly sullied her reputation, because they weren't married. Of course, they couldn't get married because he was married to Anna Scott.
Right.
So it was bad from all angles, but they had a very good relationship. So I think that is a beautiful yet tragic story. So
I hope you do more with it. That would be a wonderful. That's your next book.
I'd love to. I'd like to get back to that, because it's I got the rights back to it from the publisher, and so it's mine. I can do what I like with it now. So in time, I'll definitely try to do something with that.
That would be wonderful. He had more than his fair share of love and heartbreak. I think he'd be a good one.
Certainly. Yeah. So another story. Could you tell us about Catherine St. John, please?
Oh, this poor woman. Yes. So again, back to those six sisters. And when I was doing the research, and it's family history, so I've been reading about them for decades. But as I looked at Lucy on the far left, who became the Lady of the Tower, when I was writing that book, I thought, I can't possibly write about all six of them. Everyone will get confused. I'm confused, but let me pull out the ones who have the great stories. So I pulled out Barbara Villas, who was, Cleveland's grandmother, and she's in the book. But I also had to pull out the story of her older sister, Catherine St. John. Catherine was, again, brought up at Lydiard, as they all were, after a certain period of time. And Catherine was the first to get married. And she married a local gentleman from Wiltshire called Sir Giles Montpesson. And Sir Giles was even at that early time, I think he was a bit of a fortune hunter, a bit of a sort of dark horse. He saw Lydiard and the family and the reputation as being something that he would like to sort of marry into. So although he was described as a little, dark and swarthy man, he certainly swept her off her feet and persuaded the family that they should marry. So they married, and shortly after that, Sir Giles embarked on his career, originally under the approval of James I, of coming together with this massive licensing scheme for inns across the country. And
I think I remember this, yeah.
Yeah. It actually evolved into him being, frankly, the most hated man in England. So while, Catherine was at home, sort of having babies and living in this bucolic splendor of the Wiltshire countryside, Sir Giles and his buddy were riding around the countryside, basically extorting money from every single inn, saying, you need to give us money in order to keep your license. And then he pocketed it, basically, and didn't pass it on to the king's coffers. And it turned into this massive scandal. And he became known, frankly, as the most notorious criminal in England, because I guess if you get between an Englishman and his inn, you're not going to be a popular person. So
no, you certainly not.
Certainly not. So Sir Giles actually then, he was eventually, James put a stop to it, and he was so horrified that when Giles went to trial, James first even presided over it to sort of give this appearance that he hadn't condoned any of this sort of licensing. He wasn't trying to raise money. I knew nothing about this. And he was appalled by all of these deeds, and Giles was sentenced to exile. So he skipped the country, actually aided by the St. John family. Catherine and her brothers and sisters all got together. They managed to smuggle him out of the country, and he lived in exile for many, many years. But she obviously loved him. She obviously, again, we're talking about this woman who was, very well brought up, but absolutely adored this sort of rakish criminal. She stayed completely true to him. She waited for him, and eventually he was able to return. And he created this beautiful monument, which is in the church at Lydiard. It's in St. Mary's Church. And he was very grateful, I think, that she stayed true to him through all of his troubles. And if I can just read you his version of his history and their love affair.
Yes, please.
He's got this wonderful Latin transcription there, but the translation is, and he put this tomb in, actually while he was still alive, which many of them did, but he put the tomb in saying, "Sacred to the memory of the best of women, the Lady Catherine Mompesson, peerless in beauty, chastity, constancy, piety, and every form of virtue, the eldest sister of Sir John St. John of Lydiard Tregoes, Baronet, and dearest wife of Giles Mompesson of the ancient family of Bathampton." I don't know where he pulled that out from, by the way, because I think that was his wannabe. But of the ancient family of Bathampton in the county of Wiltshire, Knight, this Giles, fully mindful of 26 years of happily married life, being still alive, had made this tomb where he has given orders for his ashes to be laid when the day shall come. So nothing about, he was able to say, because this wonderful woman had stayed constant through this entire criminal escapade, he was able to conveniently forget all of that, put this beautiful tomb up to her and say that, she was the love of his life. So notorious to the end, I think.
Yes. Well, yes. Earlier I was thinking, well, she must have had a thing for the bad boy.
I think she did.
That must, yeah. That's quite nice. That whole tomb was very beautiful. So
gorgeous.
Did something right there.
Alabaster. And it's the monuments within the church at Lydiard are extraordinary. It's a Grade 2 listed church, and it's because Sir John St. John, the first baronet, he bought his baronetcy from James when James was raising funds in 1611. So he put in, this wonderful, splendid sort of ornamental tombs to the family. So you have, Catherine and Giles. You have this extraordinary life-size polyptych, which is one of its kind in the country. And then you have the Golden Cavalier, which we've seen me write about him. It's this extraordinary life-size cavalier, all in gold, gold paint. And then John's own tomb. So, behind all of these stories, you walk in there and they're all standing there. They're all alive. They're all right there. So,
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love being there.
That's great. For visitors who wish to go to Lydiard Tregoes,
yes.
Are they able to visit the church? Is that open as part of a visit, or do you?
Yes, so the house is open April through December. We close it in the first part of the year for cleaning and restoration work. So it reopens April the 1st. The church is open, I think it's on select Sundays, obviously for worship. And then there are select heritage open days where you can go visit. So, and then again, if anyone's interested, we have a number of docents as part of the Friends who would be more than happy to open the church and arrange for viewings, because it really is extraordinary.
Oh, that's great. It does seem like a wonderful place to visit.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So, have you been recently?
Yes, I was there actually just before Christmas doing some research, and I was again spent time in the church and in the house. But I was also doing a little bit of research on another love story.
Oh, yes.
Do we have time to share that one?
Yeah, I'll just, yeah, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, it's just 2 minutes because it's another.
Yeah. Yes,
it's the last little story that I have. I was actually at Bletsoe House, which is over in Bedfordshire. And for those of you who are medievalists, this was actually the home of where Margaret Beaufort grew up. And it's another St. John family home. It's actually in private hands now.
Right.
But I was doing some research there on another Puritan, and that sort of possibly might be my next book. So again, just to sort of share that story.
How exciting.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's sort of a story that I can share later, but it's an interesting one.
Right. I'll see if Gavin can put up the image 12.
I'd love to hear. I think you were going to talk a little bit about the Marlboroughs, right? Can we?
Yes,
well, before we go to the Puritans, let's hear the truth on John and Sarah.
Yes. Well, okay. All right, then we can go to image 11 then, please. Another long-standing, passionate love story is between John Churchill and Sarah Jennings, and they became the first Duke and Duchess of Marlborough. And they are here. He's on the left, she's more in the middle, and they are surrounded by their children. Now, they met in the 1670s. They were married, I believe, 1678. And she said she was not going to give away her favors like other ladies at court, and he had to put a ring on it, so to speak. So he did. But that was, they had a very, very passionate love, and he was very dutiful to her and vice versa. But she did fall out with lots of people, including some of her own children. So she was quite a tempestuous person. But he was known to have that kind of lady, for he had an affair with Barbara in the early 1670s, before he met Sarah, and so that's the Barbara affair would haunt Sarah, because even though she wasn't with him at the time, it still irked her quite a lot. So when it was in pamphlets later and political writings against him, that would be a bit of a sore spot for her, because she loved him so deeply. And of course, Blenheim Palace, that's where they lived. They were given that as a gift from a grateful nation by Queen Anne. And of course, Sarah was Queen Anne's favorite, and she used that position of power to get all the goodies for herself and her family. And that's why, so if you go to Blenheim Palace today, you can see that amazing Baroque extravaganza that it is. And it's all for Sarah and John. So quite a place.
I can only imagine that there must have been a lot of sort of plate throwing and shouting in that relationship, especially.
I think so.
I think it was very tempestuous. And wasn't there, and was it even at the time a rumor that Barbara's fifth child was actually John's. Wasn't that a sort of rumor?
Yes, I think it's very likely, indeed,
Yeah.
that John was the father of Barbara's youngest
Yeah.
daughter, also named
And
Barbara.
so not only does Sarah have to deal with, an old lover, she's got potentially some evidence in front of her all the time too.
Who has been conveniently sent off to a convent in France. So
All
he
right.
has really nothing to do with her throughout her life, sadly.
Yes.
But yes, people did bring that up.
Yeah. Well, I think Sarah was an extraordinary woman. I came across her a little bit when I was transcribing and reading the letters between Frances Apsley and Mary Stuart, which again is another whole contentious, they're very passionate love letters. But they're also, letters that were in the style of the time. But there was a wonderful letter, Frances's father, Alan Apsley, he was a family. There's this one mention that he has to actually remove Sarah's mother from court because she was interfering too much in her daughter's life. So,
oh dear.
yes, and Sarah was quite happy to go along with that. She actually asked Alan to get rid of her mother for him. So obviously Sarah had her own personality that was on attraction there.
She certainly did. She liked to get her way. Yeah, which she had in common with Barbara Villas. So
exactly. Which can I just stop for a moment and say I just finished reading your book, your biography. I mean, first of all, the courage to take on Barbara Villas and spend 2 years with her, 3 years, however long it was, and write. Yeah. But it's an extraordinary biography, Andrea. I mean, your research.
Thank you.
I mean, there's still so much unknown about her, but you brought her to life through the eyes of others, and it's a fascinating biography. I was honored to have an advance copy. When is it actually coming out for publication?
Well, we have a date for the 30th of July this summer, so we'll see.
Well, I will say it's a must-have on any 17th century band's bookshelf. And I even love the title. I mean, for it to be called Ravenous, how did you even think of that? I mean, it's just such a perfect title for Barbara Villas.
Well, I got it from Gilbert Burnet. He said that she was, he described her, and one of the words was ravenous. And I thought that is actually so perfect for her because of all the words you can choose to describe her, that would be it, I think.
Yeah. The ultimate love story, but not really love. Love. Yeah.
Yes.
Just
power hungry, perhaps.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for taking the time to read that. I appreciate that.
Well, I loved it. It's a pride of place on my bookshelf. It's fantastic book.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much. Your readers should already know this, but for those who haven't read your books transport the reader back in time. And I really recommend all who are listening to this right now to go out and pick up a copy of one of her books because they're fantastic. You won't regret it. You can you can follow Elizabeth on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com/Elizabeth J. St. John. So that's like St. John at the end, like that. But I will also have some links available so you can just click on those. All right. Well, thank you so much, Liz. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been an absolute joy, and I still have costume envy because I think you look absolutely fabulous.
Thank you so much. It's my one day a week, a month when I can do this. So
you're not like that every day? Don't destroy my illusion of the 17th century lady.
I wish I could do this every day.
Hard to do the washing up with all those flounces, but yes.
Yes, and walk the dog. Yeah.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. It's been a joy spending time with you. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you so much. All right. And that's all from us today. Thank you all for joining us. I hope to have the pleasure of your company next month on Stuart Saturday Live. Until then, keep it Stuart.